felt that if I get hurt by a sparring partner, Hagler was going to kill me. And I got so upset that I called my trainer. I said, Mike, they think I'm going to lose.
Sugar Ray Leonard is one of the most admired fighters in boxing history. Sharp, charismatic, and a true student of the sport. But behind the smiles and the smooth combinations was a competitor who hated one thing more than anything else: being pushed, being cornered, and being forced to confront fighters who matched his strengths or exposed his weaknesses.
And we're going to have a decision, and then Leonard may have pulled it out with the 15th round. Leonard bombing away again.
Now, at 69, Leonard has finally opened up about the 10 fighters he hated the most. Not because of personal grudges or scandals, but because they brought out a side of him he didn't enjoy facing. These are the men who forced him into wars, who chased him at full speed.
Bell has the he's taken what you would call command of the fight. But look, you're right.
Who made him dig deeper than he wanted to. This is not a list of enemies. This is a list of the fighters who made Sugar Ray Leonard uncomfortable, who made him train harder, who made him question himself, and ultimately, who made him great. Let's begin. 10. Wilfred Benitez. Sugar Ray Leonard never forgot his first world title shot against Wilfred Benitez. He didn't hate Benitez the man, he hated the puzzle. Fighting Benitez felt like standing in front of a mirror that moved, slipped, countered, and refused to break rhythm.
The corner is doing an effective job instilling that flow of blood between rounds from Benitez's forehead.
Benitez wasn't just slick, he was silent, cold, and impossible to read. Leonard hated how he couldn't intimidate him. He hated how Benitez stared through him like he was nothing new. The fight forced Leonard into a level of discipline he had never experienced before. Every mistake Benitez capitalized on. Every hesitation Benitez punished. Leonard would later admit Benitez made him sharpen his boxing IQ more than any opponent he'd faced at that stage of his career. It wasn't personal. It was the frustration of knowing Benitez could make him look ordinary, even while he was winning. 9. Aaron Pryor. Leonard hated watching Aaron Pryor fight long before the idea of actually facing him ever became real. Pryor was chaos. He was relentless. He pressed, bullied, and swung like a man who didn't fear consequences. Leonard hated the energy Pryor brought because it reminded him of a version of himself he avoided unleashing. Pryor's non-stop pace was the kind Leonard dreaded preparing for. There were no breaks, no rhythm, no moments to breathe or dictate tempo. Pryor would have chased him from bell to bell, forcing Leonard into the kind of street fight he didn't enjoy. Behind the scenes, Leonard admitted Pryor was the one man whose stamina scared him. Pryor could fight like he was plugged into electricity. Leonard knew the fight would be war, and he hated wars. 8. Marvin Hagler. Leonard respected Hagler more than almost any fighter, but he hated everything about the idea of fighting him. Hagler represented punishment. Fighting Hagler meant preparing not for speed or finesse, but for an emotional, physical, and psychological marathon. Leonard hated Hagler's consistency, his cold intensity, his ability to keep marching forward. Hagler was a man who didn't break, didn't fade, and didn't allow his opponents to dictate anything. Leonard despised training camps spent thinking about one thing: survival. Even after Leonard beat him, Hagler remained the opponent he hated thinking about, because the fight forced him to face the darkest corners of his own self-confidence. Leonard hated Hagler because Hagler made him doubt himself more than any fighter ever had. 7. Roberto Duran Duran is the definition of a man who gets under your skin. Leonard didn't just hate Duran's style. He hated Duran's personality, his aggression, his language, the psychological warfare, the taunts, the stare-downs, the bullying. Duran represented the opposite of Leonard's identity. Duran refused to be impressed by anything Leonard did. He laughed at fast hands. He mocked fancy footwork. He fought with anger, intensity, and a desire to embarrass his opponent. Leonard hated the emotional pressure Duran forced on him. Even when Leonard made him quit in the rematch, the resentment remained. Duran took Leonard into a place of raw, street-fighting emotion that Leonard didn't enjoy revisiting. Duran wasn't just an opponent, he was a tormentor. 6. Thomas Hitman. Hearns was the fighter Leonard hated preparing for most. Tall, long, explosive, terrifying power. Everything about Hearns made Leonard nervous in the gym. He hated worrying about the right hand. He hated the idea of losing focus for even one split second. Hearns was built to destroy people, and Leonard knew it. The first fight forced Leonard into a brutal, painful comeback. He hated every moment Hearns controlled the distance. He hated being forced to take risks he normally avoided. He hated being behind on the scorecards. Hearns made Leonard dig deeper than anyone in his prime, and Leonard hated the vulnerability that exposed. Hearns didn't just challenge him. Hearns threatened to define him. 5. Floyd Mayweather Sr. People forget how tricky Floyd Mayweather Sr. was. Leonard hated fighting guys who were difficult for the sake of being difficult, and Mayweather Sr. embodied that philosophy. He was awkward, slippery, unorthodox, and unpredictable. Leonard hated chasing fighters. He hated waiting. He hated having to force exchanges. Mayweather Sr. made offense frustrating, made defense complicated, and made rhythm impossible. But most of all, Leonard hated the attitude. Floyd Sr. carried the same defiance his son would later perfect. He fought like a man with everything to prove and nothing to fear. Leonard was forced to step outside his comfort zone just to keep momentum. Mayweather Sr. was the kind of opponent Leonard never enjoyed. Crafty, stubborn, and uninterested in giving the audience an entertaining fight. 4. Meldrick Taylor. Leonard hated speed, not his own, other people's. And Meldrick Taylor had the kind of speed that made even Sugar Ray feel slow. That alone was enough to frustrate Leonard. Taylor's hands were relentless. His combinations were unpredictable. He moved like water, never standing still long enough for Leonard to find his comfortable rhythm. Leonard hated that. He hated fighters who didn't let him control the pace. Taylor also had heart. Too much heart. He fought aggressively, confidently, and without hesitation. Leonard felt Taylor would have pushed him into an exhausting chess match he didn't want to play. Taylor wasn't a nightmare stylistically. He was a nightmare psychologically. 3. Pernell Whitaker. Leonard hated fighters he couldn't hit clean, period. And no one embodied that problem more than Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker. Whitaker was defense personified. Leonard hated that style. He hated missing. He hated being countered. He hated chasing ghosts. Whitaker's defense frustrated entire divisions, but for Leonard, the frustration would have been unbearable. Every angle Whitaker used, every slip, every duck, every pivot, Leonard knew it would force him into the kind of ugly, grinding, technical fight he despised. Whitaker wasn't just slippery, he was confident, relaxed, annoyingly calm. Leonard hated fighters who smiled while making him miss. Whitaker would have made Leonard question everything, his timing, his accuracy, even his patience. 2. Hector Camacho. Speed, energy, flair. Camacho brought a style Leonard hated dealing with. He was fast enough to avoid exchanges, slick enough to frustrate, and unpredictable enough to spark doubt. Leonard hated theatrical fighters, and Camacho was theatrical from the moment he walked into the arena. The dancing, the footwork, the showmanship, it all irritated Leonard. Camacho's rhythm was awkward, his angles were unusual, and his punches came from places Leonard didn't expect. Leonard hated preparing for fighters whose style didn't make sense on paper. Camacho forced chaos. Leonard knew Camacho would try to clown him, try to embarrass him, try to make him look old or slow. That alone was enough to place him high on the list. 1. Ray Leonard himself. When finally making the list, Leonard revealed the truth. The boxer he hated the most was himself. Leonard hated his own flaws. He hated his moments of fear. He hated the pressure. He hated the expectations. He hated the version of himself that hesitated, the version that doubted, the version that struggled through dark nights in training camp. The opponents on this list weren't enemies, they were reflections. And Leonard hated the reflection most of all. Every great fighter eventually realizes that the real battle is with the person in the mirror. For Leonard, every frustrating opponent forced him to confront parts of himself he didn't want to face. That's why, at 69, he admitted the truth. Ray Leonard was the one fighter Ray Leonard hated the most. Sugar Ray Leonard's career was filled with iconic moments, legendary rivalries, and unforgettable victories. But the fighters he hated the most weren't villains. They were catalysts. Each one pushed him to evolve, to sharpen his craft, and to become a more complete fighter. In the end, Leonard's story isn't about hatred at all. It's about transformation. It's about growth. It's about learning from the fighters who forced him into uncomfortable places. And that's why his legacy remains one of the greatest in boxing history.